What if Zoro never said yes to Luffy? What if, instead of becoming the first member of the Straw Hat crew, Roronoa Zoro took a different path entirely? One that led him straight into the shadows of Baroque Works? This isn't just a fun hypothetical. This single divergence reshapes the entire One Piece world. Because Zoro isn't just a crewmate, he's the backbone. He's the wall that enemies break against while Luffy keeps moving forward. Remove him from that equation and every arc, every victory, every moment the Straw Hats survived against impossible odds starts to crack. So let's go back to the beginning. Shell's Town. Zoro is tied to that post, starving 3 days deep into a deal he made to protect a little girl he barely knows. Captain Morgan's son Helmeppo had already broken his word. Zoro had every reason to be bitter, every reason to trust no one. And then Luffy drops in, frees him, hands him back his swords, and asks him to join his crew. In the original timeline, Zoro says yes, but only because Luffy earned it in that moment. He saw something real, but what if he didn't? What if Zoro walked away? What if the timing was different, the offer colder, and Zoro decided he'd reach Mihawk alone, without debts, without a crew dragging him sideways? He's a wandering swordsman with an infamous reputation and zero allegiances. That's exactly the kind of asset Crocodile recruits for Baroque Works. The approach wouldn't even need to be complicated. Mr. Zero's organization was built on mercenaries who wanted power, money, or purpose. Zoro wants one thing, to become the world's greatest swordsman. And Crocodile, brilliant manipulator that he is, would dangle the one name that makes Zoro move. Dracula Mihawk, a man with deep ties to the Shichibukai network. A man Crocodile could theoretically arrange access to. That's the hook. That's all it takes. Zoro joins Baroque Works not out of loyalty, but as a transaction. He becomes a top-tier operative, probably slotted above the Mr. One position almost immediately. Because let's be honest, Daz Bones is dangerous, but Zoro at even pre-time skip level is operating on a completely different ceiling. He cuts steel by the Alabasta arc. He holds Kaku and Jabra simultaneously in Eni's lobby. Baroque Works just gained its most lethal blade. Now here's where the timeline fractures completely. The Straw Hats reach Baroque Works without Zoro, and that changes everything. Think about every moment Zoro was the difference between survival and death. In Arlong Park, Zoro fights through a flooded room with a knife in his mouth while bleeding from Mihawk's scar, buying time. Without him, that fight ends differently. In Little Garden, he holds off 2 Baroque Works agents while the crew barely escapes. Without him, the crew doesn't make it off that island intact. And in Alabasta, the climax of this entire arc, Zoro versus Mr. One is one of the most iconic duels in the series. That fight doesn't just test Zoro physically, it's the moment he unlocks the ability to cut steel through pure instinct and will. Remove that fight, remove that breakthrough, and you've removed one of the most important steps in Zoro's journey toward Mihawk. But now Zoro is on the other side of that war. Crocodile sends Zoro to eliminate the Straw Hats, and without Zoro in their corner, Luffy's crew is devastatingly exposed. Nami has no real combat power at this stage. Usopp is clever, but not a match for a swordsman of this level. Sanji can hold his own, but a prolonged fight against Zoro, the same Zoro who pushed Mihawk enough that Mihawk switched to his full blade, is a fight Sanji does not win cleanly. Luffy is the only real answer, and that confrontation, Luffy versus Zoro, would be one of the most emotionally brutal clashes in any version of this story. Because Luffy would still try to recruit him, even mid-fight, even bleeding, Luffy would be extending his hand. That's who he is, and Zoro deep down would feel it, that pull, that recognition of something he can't quite name. But here's the turn that defines this whole alternate timeline. Zoro doesn't defect immediately. He's not that sentimental. He came here for a purpose, and he finishes what he starts. But when Crocodile moves to execute Robin, the woman who was Baroque Works' own intelligence backbone, and Zoro sees the organization consuming itself, the transaction falls apart. Crocodile never actually had access to Mihawk. It was leverage. It was always leverage. And Zoro, who has never once compromised his code, doesn't tolerate being used. He doesn't join the Straw Hats in a warm moment. He walks away from Baroque Works in the middle of the chaos, blades drawn against his former employer, helping Luffy reach Crocodile not out of friendship, not yet, but because Crocodile broke the deal. And in Zoro's world, that is unforgivable. The aftermath is where it gets fascinating. Zoro isn't a straw hat in the traditional sense. He doesn't celebrate on the ship. He doesn't laugh at the dinner table that night. He sits apart, sharpens his swords, and acknowledges Luffy with a single nod. Luffy, of course, immediately declares him part of the crew. Zoro doesn't argue. That's how it starts, but the ripple effects go even deeper. Zoro spent time inside Baroque Works. He knows how the Shichibukai system works from the inside. He knows how world government proxies operate, how they use plausible deniability, how they keep their hands clean while the world burns. That knowledge, fed into Luffy's crew, accelerates their understanding of the true enemy. Not pirates, not marines, the system itself. And Zoro, who came into this story as a transaction, leaves it with something he never planned for. A crew that doesn't need him to be loyal. They just need him to show up. And for a man who has never once abandoned his word, showing up is the easiest thing in the world. The world's greatest swordsman doesn't just need the sharpest blade, he needs the right crew behind him when the blade swings. Roronoa Zoro found that, just the long way around. Now tell me, in this version of the story, does Zoro reach Mihawk faster, or does the detour cost him everything?